The Galaxy S10 marks the first time in a long time where choosing the smaller Galaxy S flagship won't result in losing significant camera capabilities. Both the Galaxy S10 and Galaxy S10 Plus ship with a triple camera system around back, which also marks the first generation Samsung is using an ultra-wide-angle camera on its phones. This ultra-wide-angle camera is the biggest change coming from the Galaxy Note 9, as the standard and telephoto cameras are otherwise identical to what we saw on Samsung's best 2019 flagship. It's that ultra-wide-angle lens that represents the most exciting new addition to Samsung's lineup and joins ranks with LG and Huawei in having such abilities. Samsung chose a wider angle than everyone else by several degrees, coming in at 123 degrees, making this the absolute widest angle smartphone camera on the market. Simply put, that means you'll see more of the whole scene at once, but it also means there's going to be a tad bit of distortion due to having a fisheye lens. During the day, you'll notice that it's got wider dynamic range than both the Huawei Mate 20 Pro and the LG V40 ThinQ. During these brighter conditions, the Galaxy S10's ultra-wide-angle camera is the best you'll find. In any kind of lower lighting, however, the performance significantly degrades when compared to the other two major phones with an ultra-wide-angle lens. The pixel size on this 16-megapixel camera is quite a bit smaller than what's on the main 12-megapixel camera and, as a result, noise elevates significantly in lower lighting. Oddly enough, Samsung appears to be using a different type of processing for the ultra-wide-angle camera in low light than it does with the main camera. On the main camera, lower lighting typically allows a bit more noise into the shot to preserve detail, but this doesn't appear to be the case on the ultra-wide-angle one. The result is pretty clear, or shall we say pretty muddy. Dynamic range is still wide enough and the shots look plenty bright, but the fine detail gets lost very quickly, and even in a well-lit restaurant just looks soft and a bit cheap. Whether or not you'd ever zoom into a photo enough to see this result may be another conversation entirely, so this issue may be less relevant than if it happened on the other two cameras. As we saw on the Galaxy Note 9, the 12-megapixel rear camera is an incredibly solid performer in any lighting condition. The two biggest negatives come in the form of color reproduction and fine detail. Colors tend to be a tad on the warm side, which is not offensive but is not color accurate either. Fine detail can also sometimes be lacking, as has been the case on Samsung phones for a significant number of generations now, but Samsung has improved this over the past 2 years in particular. Samsung's processing tends to over-scrub noise out of a scene, which results in reduced fine detail on objects. This is most apparent when a scene requires extra HDR processing and is similar to what LG does on the V40. This loss of fine detail is more apparent on the telephoto camera, which shows less detail than other telephoto cameras out there in many situations. There's absolutely no comparison with the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, as that 5x hybrid zoom just kills it in every situation. And oddly enough, even the Pixel 3 often beats the Galaxy S10's telephoto camera in sheer detail. This is of course a bit strange, since the Pixel 3 only uses a single camera system with the same megapixel count as the Galaxy S10's main camera, yet it's clear Google's software tricks do a better job of producing a nicer zoomed-in image than Samsung's dedicated hardware solution in many lighting conditions. All three cameras seem to do an exemplary job at capturing motion, though, even in lower lighting conditions, and this is where Samsung seems to have made the single biggest improvement over previous generations. When compared to the Pixel 3, there's seemingly no contest. Samsung's Galaxy S10 takes clearer, less blurry pictures than Google's latest flagship in every lighting condition we tested movement in. Folks with kids will particularly appreciate this, as I had no issue taking pictures of my 5-year-old son in any lighting condition with the Galaxy S10, and it frequently was either the best or tied with the best in all of these cases. That ultra-fast dual-pixel focusing system is really paying off here, and the f-stop 1.5 dual aperture helps lower shutter speeds in lower light, resulting in sharper imagery. Moving on to low-light shots with less movement, you'll find that the Galaxy S10's camera performs essentially identically to the Galaxy Note 9. It excels at providing a super balanced image that has tons of detail, good dynamic range, and prioritizes light sources being blown out. Shots end up being slightly darker than the Mate 20 Pro, but considerably brighter than the Pixel 3's auto mode in many cases. As we've seen in the past, Samsung is not afraid to let a little noise into lower light shots to keep them from looking muddy, and I wish they would extend this kind of processing to daytime shots as well, as it really just looks gorgeous. In auto mode, you'll find the Galaxy S10 tends to trade blows with the LG V40 in many moderately low light shots. Very low light shots are probably the biggest disappointment with the camera, but that's because Samsung still doesn't have a proper night mode. Most of the time you'll find taking low light shots uses the standard auto mode, even with the scene detection enabled, and there's no way to force what's called bright night mode. Rather, you're just going to have to hope that automatic scene detection switches to this new mode when it's needed most. Even then, you may find that auto mode just turns out the better picture, even if it's a darker one. Bright mode's effectiveness isn't nearly what I had hoped going into this review, and I found that there was almost never a situation where I preferred the picture taken with bright night mode enabled. The problems are twofold, and they're entirely situationally dependent. Some scenes don't appear much brighter than with just using auto mode, if at all, and even when they are brighter, the loss in detail is almost never worth it. You'll see that quality is pretty neck and neck with LG's auto night mode, which is a similar idea on the surface, but does things very differently on the back and user-facing ends. LG's uses pixel binning on the sensor to take these shots almost instantly, while Samsung's method asks you to hold the phone still for a few seconds while it captures several photographs and stitches them together. Given the time difference and the lack of any substantial quality difference in most shots, LG's method seems to work better for this style of auto night mode. Oftentimes, keeping scene detection off resulted in a nicer picture, and the quality performance was more predictable when the setting was off as well. Speaking of predictable, Samsung has added a few cool new features to the camera software this time around, and those are utilizing that new generation neural processing unit inside the Snapdragon 855. Samsung has designed a way for the NPU to analyze the viewfinder in real time and come up with suggestions for each shot. Sometimes this tells you to slightly adjust the angle you're looking at to better frame a subject, while other times it might tell you to switch to one of the other two cameras instead, either zooming in with the telephoto camera to focus on a single point, or using the ultra-wide-angle camera to take in the whole scene. My biggest complaint with the software is the continued use of this dumb carousel design. Samsung started the iPhoneification of its software, if you will, on the Galaxy S9 and now has very little differentiation between it and Apple or Google's design language. Much of this, of course, is Google's fault, as Samsung is just following what Google is doing, but it's kind of a weird time to be doing this, Samsung, as you really haven't done this in the past, and it really shows in the user experience overall. Up until the Galaxy Note 9, Samsung users were able to record a video or take a picture without ever having to switch a mode. Now you're going to have to swipe and wait until it switches between the photo or video mode, and that's just not a great experience overall. I'll never understand why every single manufacturer has been switching to this style of UI when there are clearly better ones. It's slower, clunkier, doesn't show all available modes in a single pane of glass, and is far too easy to accidentally swipe anywhere on the screen and change the mode or swap cameras. Thankfully, Pro mode is at least pretty excellent, despite not having Pro controls for video recording yet. Shutter speed adjustments up to 10 seconds in length are great, but you can still only select up to 800 ISO. Why Samsung is so afraid of high ISO, I'll just never fully understand. Manual focus has focus peaking though, which means manual focus is actually usable on the Galaxy S10, joining the ranks of the LG V series among a scant few others. Samsung has added in a ton of new advanced video modes with the Galaxy S10, but there's a bit of a caveat to all of them. They only work on the main rear camera, not the ultra-wide-angle or telephoto cameras. That includes the new 4K HDR video feature, the new super stable video mode, and 4K 60 frames a second recording. 4K HDR isn't too much of a loss though, as HDR recording on a phone is pretty useless at this point in time. First off, you'll notice two problems with this video right off the bat. It's rotated incorrectly, and the colors are all wacky. That first problem is some bug with the phone where it won't always rotate content properly, and the colors are due to improper handling of HDR to SDR conversion. While it would have been nice to see this video in the correct orientation, there's no easy way to rotate HDR video on the phone without messing up the colors, and editing HDR video in a program like Premiere isn't even remotely easy or straightforward. This is a feature that ticks a marketing box rather than provides any real value for the vast majority of people. Thankfully, image stabilization is quite excellent, as is overall exposure. You'll find that in 4K, the Galaxy S10 does a better job of nailing the exposure than the Pixel 3, and is equally as smooth as the best phones on the market. Samsung has added a new super stable mode that only works up to 1080p resolution, but can be easily toggled via single button press at the top of the viewfinder. This essentially toggles between the default resolution set, in my case 4K, and 1080p, and provides an easy one-button press way to swap between that additional stabilization when it's needed and your regular higher resolution shots. It's unfortunately limited to the main camera though, so no advanced stabilization for that ultra-wide angle or telephoto cameras as we said before. Likewise, limiting 4K 60 frames a second video to the main camera is quite a missed opportunity, especially since the LG V40 has no problem using both of these cameras at that resolution and frame rate. Thankfully, at 4K 30, the Galaxy S10 does a great job of providing a more delay-free way of switching between all three cameras, while the V40 has a noticeable pause when swapping between them. Hardware reasons aside, the user experience is far smoother on the Galaxy S10, whether it's simply pressing the buttons on the interface to toggle between all three cameras, or just dragging that slider to dynamically swap between them. Low light brings a rather large dichotomy between the standard and wide-angle cameras, which is to be expected given the pixel size difference between the sensors, but is unfortunate nonetheless. That lens is also unable to bring in as much light as the main camera's lens, and with these two combined factors, you're inevitably going to have darker video when using that ultra-wide-angle camera. Comparing it directly to the Huawei Mate 20 Pro just reinforces our opinion that Huawei has a lot of work to do when it comes to video recording. Swap that and compare the Galaxy S10 to the LG V40 and you'll find that the V40 produces a brighter, more detailed picture at both 1080p and 4K resolution and, again, has the ability to record that ultra-wide-angle camera in 4K resolution at 60 frames a second. Concerning audio recording, the S10 does an excellent job of recording audio, even at loud events like a concert or live music show. We took the Galaxy S10 and the LG V40 out on St. Patrick's Day to a local brewery for some good old Irish dancing, and while these two clips are of different songs, you'll hear the differences best if you slap on a pair of headphones before we begin. As you can tell from the clips, both phones did a great job of recording the loud audio and the tap of the hard shoes on the floor without any real distortion. The LG V40 sounds just a tad more full and dynamic, giving it the edge, but the Galaxy S10 doesn't sound bad by any means. Lastly, we'll take a look at the front-facing camera. This is an area where Samsung made one of its biggest improvements on the Galaxy Note 9, and the Galaxy S10 continues that improvement. In fact, I would venture to say that the Galaxy S10 Plus is now my single favorite front-facing camera experience on the market. The Pixel 3 still delivers pictures that look more punchy, but I don't really care for the overly harsh look of these photos, particularly in portrait mode where the Pixel 3 tends to crank the sharpness and contrast up just a bit too much. The pictures taken with the Pixel 3's front-facing camera tend to look hyper-real instead of real, while the Galaxy S10 just looks a lot more natural, with more realistic colors and skin tones in particular, as well as less harsh-looking lines on my face. Beauty mode was disabled for these shots, so that does not account for the difference. The Galaxy S10 Plus's new depth camera on the front does an excellent job at front-facing portrait mode, which is a massive improvement over all previous Samsung phones, as those really just did a terrible job at object detection in this mode. You will unfortunately see worse detection on the standard Galaxy S10 though, as that does not have the extra depth camera on front. Low light is a wash between most phones we've tested, and the front-facing cameras don't show all that much difference in quality when comparing any of these phones. The Galaxy S10 also has this odd wide-angle setting on the front camera, but that standard mode is really just a crop of the wide-angle one, since there's only one camera here, making it a bit of a strange option to even provide. At the end of the day, I feel very positive about Samsung's latest flagship phone cameras. This is particularly interesting because it's the best in very few situations, but it's also almost never the worst either. It's sort of a happy middle ground in all areas, with particular strong suits in just a few. Quality restrictions in the video mode hurt it when compared to the LG V40, and a lack of a true night mode puts it behind many other phones that have launched with such a feature. If these aren't deal breakers for you, however, it's likely that the Galaxy S10 will provide the most well-balanced experience of any phone on the market, especially if you have children or pets to take pictures of. We hope you enjoyed that camera review and will subscribe to us for more. We aim to bring you the best coverage in the industry and hope you'll agree by visiting us regularly. We're on your favorite social media network and 24/7 at AndroidHeadlines.com. Thanks for watching, and until next time.